The glass doors of Pinnacle Global Solutions gleamed in the morning light as Catherine Wells strode through the lobby. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing through the space as employees nodded respectfully. At 38, Catherine had become one of the youngest CEOs in the industry, turning the struggling tech company into a powerhouse in just 3 years. Today was particularly important. Japanese investors were visiting, and their potential partnership could open doors to Asian markets that had previously seemed unreachable. Catherine checked her watch and frowned. The meeting was in 15 minutes, and she'd barely slept 4 hours. The presentation had needed last-minute changes, and she'd been up until 2 a.m. making adjustments. Her assistant handed her a coffee as she walked into her office. "The investors just arrived," he said. "They're being shown to the conference room." Catherine nodded, taking a quick sip. "Perfect. Make sure everything's set up properly. This deal could change everything for us." The conference room was immaculate. Fresh flowers on the table, water pitchers filled, presentation materials neatly arranged. Catherine greeted the Japanese businessmen with practiced ease, bowing slightly as she'd been instructed by her cultural consultant. Mr. Tanaka, the lead investor, smiled warmly and introduced his team. The meeting began smoothly. The company translator, David, facilitated the conversation as Catherine walked them through Pinnacle's latest innovations and growth projections. Everything was going perfectly until Mr. Tanaka began speaking rapidly in Japanese, gesturing excitedly about something on his tablet. David seemed overwhelmed, struggling to keep up with the technical terms. Catherine felt a knot forming in her stomach as she watched the momentum slipping away. "I apologize," David said quietly. "He's using very specialized business and technical vocabulary that I'm not familiar with." Catherine maintained her smile, but internally she was panicking. This partnership was too important to lose over a translation issue. They muddled through the rest of the meeting with David doing his best, but it was clear that something had been lost. As the investors prepared to leave, Mr. Tanaka handed Catherine a document written entirely in Japanese. "This outlines our conditions," he explained through David. "Please review and respond by next week." After they left, Catherine sat alone in the conference room, staring at the incomprehensible characters on the page. Frustration bubbled up inside her. How was she supposed to respond to something she couldn't even read? The company's regular translator clearly wasn't equipped for this level of technical Japanese. She was still sitting there when the door opened quietly, and an older black woman entered with a cleaning cart. This was Edith Johnson, the evening janitor. Catherine had seen her around but had rarely spoken to her beyond basic pleasantries. At 67, Edith moved slowly but efficiently, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces without disturbing anything important. "Sorry to interrupt," Edith said softly. "I can come back later if you're still working." Catherine waved her hand dismissively. "No, it's fine. I'm just struggling with something." Edith nodded and continued cleaning. Catherine watched her for a moment, then looked back at the Japanese document. The day's stress combined with her lack of sleep made her unusually impulsive. "Edith," she said suddenly, "have you ever wished you had different skills? That you could do something completely different from what you do now?" Edith paused, leaning slightly on her broom. "Everyone has hidden talents, Ms. Wells. Sometimes they just don't get the chance to show them." Something about the woman's calm dignity irritated Catherine in her stressed state. Without really thinking about her actions, she held up the Japanese document. "Well, here's a skill that takes years of study and practice. Our translator couldn't even handle it properly today, and he has a degree in Japanese. Can you make sense of this?" The moment the words left her mouth, Catherine regretted them. It was unprofessional and unkind to challenge an employee this way, especially someone who had never given her any trouble. She was about to apologize when Edith set down her cleaning supplies and approached the table. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the document. Catherine handed it over, expecting nothing but ready to apologize for her rudeness. Edith adjusted her glasses and studied the paper carefully. The conference room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. A few other employees passing by glanced curiously through the glass walls, wondering why the CEO was sitting with the janitor. "This is quite technical," Edith said finally. Her voice different somehow, more confident, more precise. "But if I'm not mistaken, they're asking for exclusive rights to your new security protocol in exchange for their investment." They're also requesting quarterly development updates and the right to review any modifications before they're implemented. There's a clause here about profit sharing that seems heavily weighted in their favor. Catherine's mouth fell open. She stared at Edith, who continued analyzing the document as if it were the most natural thing in the world. By now, several employees had stopped outside the conference room, watching the scene unfold with increasing interest. Catherine's assistant entered, confused by the gathering crowd, then froze when he heard Edith speaking fluently about complex business terms in the context of Japanese investment practices. "I think," Edith continued, pointing to a specific paragraph, "this section is particularly concerning. It essentially gives them veto power over any new partnerships you might form in the Asian market. If I were in your position, I would push back on that point specifically." The room had gone completely silent. Catherine found her voice at last. You speak Japanese? Fluently enough to understand complex business terminology?" Edith smiled slightly, the first real smile Catherine had seen from her. "Yes, Ms. Wells, I do." Catherine's mind was reeling. She glanced at the growing audience outside the conference room, their expressions mirroring her own shock. She had made assumptions about this woman based solely on her current job, never once considering there might be more to her story. Now those assumptions were crumbling before her eyes, and she wasn't the only one witnessing it. The silence in the conference room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Catherine Wells stared at Edith Johnson, the elderly janitor who had just expertly translated complex Japanese business terminology that had stumped their professional translator. The small crowd of employees gathered outside the glass walls whispered among themselves, pointing discreetly at the unexpected scene. "How?" Catherine finally managed to ask. "How do you know Japanese at this level?" Edith carefully placed the document back on the conference table. Her hands, though weathered with age, moved with a certain elegance that Catherine hadn't noticed before. "I taught linguistics at Howard University for 32 years, Edith explained, her voice taking on a different quality, educated, refined, but still humble. "I specialized in East Asian languages, particularly Japanese and Korean. I published several papers on the evolution of business terminology and post-war Japanese economic documents." Catherine's assistant, Thomas, who had entered the room, let out an audible gasp. "Wait, are you Dr. Edith Johnson, the author of Cultural Implications in East Asian Business Communications?" Edith turned to him with mild surprise. "You've read my work? It was required reading in my international business course." Thomas exclaimed, "Professor, what are you doing here?" "Cleaning?" Catherine felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. She had never bothered to learn anything about the woman who quietly cleaned the offices each evening. And now she was discovering that Edith was not just educated, but renowned in her field. "I retired from teaching 5 years ago," Edith explained, seemingly untroubled by the attention she was receiving. "After my husband passed away, I found retirement too quiet. I wanted something simple that would keep me active and among people, but without the pressures of academia. This job suits me fine. The hours work well. The physical activity keeps me healthy. And I still have time for my research and my grandchildren." By now, Mr. Phillips from the legal department had entered, drawn by the commotion. "Dr. Johnson, I can't believe it's you. Your work on linguistic patterns in international negotiations was the foundation of my thesis." Edith smiled warmly at him. "How lovely to hear that. And how is your work in international contract law going, Mr. Phillips? You remember me?" he asked, astonished. "Of course. You asked thoughtful questions during my guest lecture at Georgetown Law 7 years ago. I remember serious students." Catherine sat back in her chair trying to process what was happening. The elderly janitor she had impulsively challenged was not only able to translate complex Japanese business documents, but was apparently a respected academic whose work had influenced people in her own company. People Catherine had hired for their expertise had been shaped by Edith's teachings. "Dr. Johnson," Catherine said, carefully using the title Edith had earned, "I owe you an apology. My behavior was disrespectful and based on unfair assumptions." Edith waved away the apology. "No need for that. We all make judgments based on what we see. It's a natural human tendency. Still, I shouldn't have challenged you that way. It was unprofessional and unkind." "Perhaps," Edith acknowledged, "but it's led to an interesting moment, hasn't it? Sometimes we need unexpected situations to see beyond our usual perspectives." By now, word had spread through the office. More employees hovered near the conference room, curious about what was happening. Catherine noticed Mr. Patel from IT looking particularly shocked. Dr. Johnson was a visiting professor at Tokyo University when I was an exchange student there, he explained to those around him. Her lectures on cross-cultural communication were legendary. I had no idea she was working here. Catherine stood up, suddenly aware of the opportunity before her. Dr. Johnson, would you be willing to take a look at the rest of these documents from our Japanese investors? Your insights would be incredibly valuable. I'd be happy to, Edith replied, checking her watch. My shift ends in an hour, but I can stay a bit longer today. No, Catherine said quickly. This wouldn't be part of your janitorial duties. This would be consulting work compensated accordingly. In fact, if you're interested, we could discuss a more formal consulting arrangement for our international projects. Edith considered this for a moment. That might be interesting, though I wouldn't want to give up my current position entirely. As I said, I enjoy the simplicity and physical activity. Of course, whatever works for you, Catherine assured her. We can be flexible. News of what had happened spread quickly. By the time they moved to Catherine's office to discuss the Japanese documents in detail, the story had reached every corner of the building. The company's head of HR appeared at Catherine's door. Dr. Johnson, I had no idea about your background when we hired you, she said apologetically. We should have recognized your skills and experience. Edith smiled. You hired me for the position I applied for. I didn't include my academic background on that application because it wasn't relevant to cleaning floors. I made that choice deliberately. As they settled in to work on the documents, Catherine found herself fascinated by Edith's approach. She didn't just translate the words. She explained cultural context, business implications, and subtle nuances that would have been completely lost otherwise. Here, Edith pointed out, they're using a phrase that literally translates to mutual prosperity. But in Japanese business culture, especially coming from a company like Mr. Tanaka's, it carries an expectation of loyalty that goes beyond the written terms. They would consider it a serious breach of trust if you partnered with their competitors, even if your contract doesn't explicitly forbid it. For 2 hours, they worked through the documents together. Catherine took detailed notes, increasingly aware that she was receiving a master class in international business communication. When Mr. Tanaka called to follow up on their meeting, Catherine put him on speakerphone and was astonished to hear Edith engage him in fluent Japanese. The investor's tone immediately changed from formal to genuinely delighted. Who is this woman? He asked in English after several minutes of conversation. Her Japanese is exceptional, and she understands the nuances of our proposal perfectly. Catherine glanced at Edith, who nodded permission to explain. This is Dr. Edith Johnson, a former linguistics professor specializing in East Asian languages. She's now consulting with us on international communications. There was a pause before Mr. Tanaka responded. Dr. Johnson, the author of Honorific Systems in Modern Business Japanese? That paper revolutionized how our company approaches English translations. Edith smiled. I'm honored that you found it useful, Mr. Tanaka. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Edith smoothly navigating between languages. By the end, Mr. Tanaka had invited both Catherine and Edith to dinner that evening to discuss their potential partnership further. After the call ended, Catherine shook her head in amazement. Dr. Johnson, you've just saved a multi-million-dollar deal that was slipping away. I don't even know how to thank you properly. It was a simple translation, Edith said modestly. No, it was much more than that. You understood things our regular translator couldn't have caught. Things I would have missed completely. Catherine hesitated, then asked, would you join us for dinner with the investors tonight? As our expert consultant, not as... She trailed off, embarrassed again. Not as the janitor? Edith finished for her with a gentle smile. Of course, though I'll need to go home and change first. My cleaning uniform isn't quite right for business dinners. The Japanese restaurant's private dining room hummed with conversation and occasional laughter. Catherine watched in amazement as Edith charmed the investors with her knowledge of Japanese culture, business etiquette, and even regional dialects. Gone was the quiet janitor who blended into the background of office life. In her place sat an elegant woman in a simple but tasteful navy blue dress, her silver hair styled neatly. Speaking with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in academia and international relations, Mr. Tanaka leaned toward Catherine during a brief lull in conversation. Dr. Johnson is remarkable. How long has she been working with your company? Catherine hesitated, unsure how to explain the unusual situation. We've only recently begun to utilize her expertise properly. Mr. Tanaka nodded approvingly. A wise decision. Her understanding of our language and customs goes far beyond mere translation. She speaks like someone who has lived among us. That's because I did, Edith explained, overhearing their exchange. I spent nearly 7 years in Japan during the 1970s and early 80s, and I've returned many times since for research and lectures. As the dinner progressed, Catherine found herself increasingly curious about Edith's life. How had this extraordinary woman ended up cleaning floors at Pinnacle Global Solutions? When the investors excused themselves for a brief business call, Catherine took the opportunity to learn more. You mentioned you lived in Japan in the 70s, she began carefully. That must have been an interesting time to be there. Edith's eyes lit up with memories. It was fascinating. Japan was experiencing its economic miracle, growing at an incredible rate. I was there on a Fulbright scholarship initially, one of very few Black Americans in the program at that time. Was it difficult? Catherine asked. Being so far from home in a very different culture. Edith took a sip of her tea before answering. It was challenging in ways I hadn't expected. I grew up in Alabama during segregation, so I was no stranger to being treated differently. But in Japan it was complicated. I faced curiosity more than hostility, though there was some of that too. Many Japanese people had never seen a black person except in American movies, which weren't exactly providing accurate representations back then. How did you handle that? The same way I'd handled things back home here, with dignity and persistence. I learned the language, immersed myself in the culture, and let my work speak for itself. Eventually, I earned respect through my research. By the time I was invited to teach at Tokyo University, I had published several well-received papers on Japanese linguistic patterns. Catherine shook her head in admiration. And after all that success, all those achievements, why work as a janitor at Pinnacle? Surely there were other opportunities more aligned with your expertise. Edith smiled, a warm, genuine expression that transformed her face. After my husband Robert passed away, I needed to rethink my life. We'd been married for 43 years. He was a history professor, and we'd built our lives around academic pursuits, research, travel. Without him, returning to that world full-time felt empty somehow. She paused, looking out the restaurant window at the city lights. I needed something completely different. Physical work has a simplicity to it. You clean a dirty floor and you can see the results immediately. After decades of theoretical work where progress is measured in tiny increments over years, there's something satisfying about that immediacy. But didn't you miss using your knowledge? Your skills? I never stopped using them, Edith replied. I still review academic papers. I still translate documents for former colleagues. I mentor students online, but I do it on my terms now, without departmental politics or publishing pressures. And the janitorial work keeps me physically active, which at my age is important. The investors returned and the conversation shifted back to business matters. Catherine found herself watching Edith with new eyes, noticing the careful way she translated cultural concepts, the respect she commanded from Mr. Tanaka and his team, the depth of knowledge she revealed with each exchange. As the evening came to a close, the investors seemed far more enthusiastic about the partnership than they had been after the initial meeting. Mr. Tanaka bowed deeply to Edith. It has been an honor, Dr. Johnson, he said in English. I have used your research in my own work for many years. To meet you in person is unexpected and delightful. He then turned to Catherine. Ms. Wells, you are fortunate to have such expertise within your company. We look forward to a productive relationship. After the investors departed, Catherine and Edith shared a cab back to the office so Edith could retrieve her car. They're going to sign, Catherine said, still somewhat amazed by the evening's success. This morning I thought the deal was falling apart, and now they're ready to move forward. Mr. Tanaka just needed to feel understood, Edith explained. In Japanese business culture, the relationship often matters more than the specific terms. They rode in comfortable silence for a few blocks before Catherine spoke again. Dr. Johnson, would you consider taking on a more formal role with us? As a consultant on international relations? The compensation would be substantially better than what you pay janitors. Edith finished with a slight smile. I'd be interested, but as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to keep my current position as well, perhaps with reduced hours. But why? With your qualifications, you could be... Catherine, Edith said gently, using her first name for the first time. Not everyone measures success or satisfaction the same way. After a lifetime of academic achievement, I've found there's wisdom in simple work too. Cleaning gives me time to think, to observe. I've learned more about your company by emptying trash bins than I would in a dozen board meetings. Catherine considered this. What have you learned? I've learned who stays late to help colleagues, who treats maintenance staff with respect, who leaves encouraging notes for the team, who keeps photos of their children on their desks and actually looks at them during difficult days. These things tell you more about a company's true culture than any mission statement. The cab pulled up to the Pinnacle building, its windows mostly dark now except for the security lights. As they walked through the quiet lobby, Catherine noticed how different it felt at night, how the space transformed when emptied of its daytime bustle. This is my world, Edith said softly, as if reading her thoughts. The quiet building at night, there's a peacefulness to it that I've grown to appreciate. They reached the employee parking area where Edith's modest sedan waited. Before getting in, Edith turned to Catherine. You know, when I was younger, I would have been offended by what happened today, being asked to translate that document the way you did. I would have seen it as disrespectful, perhaps even racist. Catherine flinched slightly. It was inappropriate. I'm still sorry about that. Perhaps, but with age comes a different perspective. I saw it as an opportunity, not just to show my abilities, but to challenge assumptions. We all make them, every day, about people based on their jobs, their appearance, their age. Edith's eyes twinkled. Even assumptions about young CEOs who wear expensive shoes and work too many hours. Catherine laughed despite herself. Guilty as charged. Life is full of unexpected teachers and lessons, Catherine. Today was just one of many you'll encounter. Edith opened her car door. I'll see you tomorrow. I believe there's a spill in the break room that needs attention. As Edith drove away, Catherine stood in the parking lot for a long moment, reflecting on how completely her perspective had shifted in a single day. She'd discovered an invaluable resource who had been right in front of her all along. Hidden in plain sight because of her own preconceptions, walking to her own car, Catherine made a mental note to learn more about the other people who kept Pinnacle running. The security guards, the maintenance staff, the cafeteria workers. How many other Edith Johnsons might be moving invisibly through the company's halls, their talents and stories unknown, simply because no one had bothered to look beyond the surface. The news spread through Pinnacle Global Solutions like wildfire. By the time Catherine arrived at work the next morning, it seemed everyone had heard about the elderly janitor who had expertly translated complex Japanese business documents and charmed the investors over dinner. People gathered in small groups, whispering and glancing toward Edith's usual supply closet. Some looked embarrassed, others curious, and a few seemed genuinely excited to discover that someone they had barely noticed held such impressive credentials. Catherine called an impromptu staff meeting for 9 a.m. The conference room quickly filled beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and peering in from the hallway. Good morning, everyone, Catherine began. I'm sure most of you have heard about what happened yesterday with Dr. Edith Johnson and our Japanese investors. Heads nodded throughout the room. Thomas, Catherine's assistant, had apparently shared the story in great detail. The experience has made me realize something important about our company culture, Catherine continued. We've been overlooking the full potential of our team. Dr. Johnson isn't the only person here with skills and talents that extend beyond their job description. Starting today, we're going to make some changes. She outlined a new initiative to create a skills inventory for all employees, regardless of position. Everyone would have the opportunity to share their educational background, language abilities, specialized knowledge, and other talents that might benefit the company in ways not directly related to their current roles. This isn't about forcing anyone to take on additional responsibilities, Catherine clarified. It's about recognizing the whole person behind each job title and creating opportunities for those who want them. After the meeting, Catherine found a message from Mr. Tanaka. The investors had been so impressed by the previous evening that they wanted to fast-track the partnership. They specifically requested that Dr. Johnson be involved in the ongoing communications. It was a stunning turnaround from the uncertainty of the day before. Catherine headed to the maintenance area, where she found Edith organizing cleaning supplies. Despite knowing what she now knew about the older woman, it was still jarring to see the distinguished professor from last night back in her gray uniform. "Dr. Johnson," Catherine said, knocking lightly on the open door. "Do you have a moment?" Edith looked up and smiled. "Of course, Ms. Wells, and please, when I'm in this uniform, Edith is fine. Only if you'll call me Catherine," she replied, stepping into the small room. "I wanted to let you know that the Japanese investors were extremely impressed. They're ready to move forward and have specifically asked for your involvement." "That's wonderful news," Edith said, genuine pleasure in her voice. Mr. Tanaka seemed like a reasonable businessman. "I think this partnership will benefit Pinnacle greatly." Catherine hesitated, then decided to be direct. "I'd like to formalize your role as our international communications consultant. We can work around your preferred schedule with the janitorial position, but I want to make sure you're properly compensated for your expertise." They discussed the details, with Catherine proposing a consulting fee that made Edith raise her eyebrows in surprise. "That's quite generous," Edith said. "It's the market rate for someone with your qualifications," Catherine corrected. "Actually, it's probably lower than what we'd pay if we hired you through a consulting firm." As they finalized the arrangement, Catherine noticed a framed photograph on Edith's small desk. It showed a younger Edith standing proudly next to a distinguished-looking man in academic regalia. "My husband, Robert," Edith explained, following Catherine's gaze. "That was taken at Howard's commencement ceremony in 1992. He was receiving an honorary doctorate for his work on civil rights history." Catherine picked up the frame carefully. "You must miss him very much." "Every day," Edith acknowledged. "But I find ways to honor his memory by continuing to live fully. Robert never believed in wasting potential, his own or others." Over the next few weeks, Pinnacle underwent subtle but significant changes. The skills inventory program revealed surprising talents among the staff. The front desk security guard had a degree in cybersecurity that he'd never been able to use professionally. One of the cafeteria workers had previously managed restaurants in 3 countries and spoke fluent French and Spanish. A junior accountant turned out to be an award-winning graphic designer who had switched careers for financial stability. Catherine created flexible arrangements that allowed these employees to contribute their additional skills while maintaining their primary roles if they wished. For some, it meant promotional opportunities. For others, it simply meant more varied and satisfying work. The Japanese partnership progressed smoothly with Edith's guidance. She worked 3 days a week as a janitor and 2 days as a consultant, insisting on keeping the cleaning job that gave her physical activity and, as she put it, a different perspective on the company. Catherine found herself stopping by Edith's maintenance room regularly, initially to discuss the Japanese partnership, but increasingly to seek her wisdom on other matters. The older woman had a unique viewpoint that combined academic insight with practical observation. "You watch people differently when they don't notice you're there," Edith explained one afternoon as they shared coffee in her small office. "As a janitor, I'm practically invisible to most employees. They continue their conversations, their behaviors, their true interactions while I'm in the room. It's quite enlightening." Catherine winced. "I'm sorry about that. People should acknowledge you regardless of your job." "Don't be sorry," Edith said, waving away the concern. "I chose this role partly because of that invisibility. It's quite similar to anthropological field research, actually. You learn more when people aren't performing for you." "And what have you learned about Pinnacle?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious. Edith considered the question thoughtfully. "You have good people here, by and large. There's less backbiting than in academia, which is refreshing. But there's also a divide between management and everyone else that goes beyond the normal corporate hierarchy. People don't share ideas across those boundaries even when they have them." Catherine nodded slowly. "That's insightful. How would you suggest addressing it?" "The skills program is a good start. It creates connections based on abilities rather than positions. But you might consider more informal mixing as well. The executive floor is beautiful, but having your leadership team eat in the main cafeteria occasionally would send a powerful message." Taking this advice to heart, Catherine began implementing small changes that broke down the company's invisible barriers. She moved her own office from the executive floor to the main work area. She instituted no-rank brainstorming sessions where maintenance staff sat alongside department heads to solve company problems. She even tried working a half-day in different departments each month to better understand the challenges faced by employees at all levels. The results were remarkable. Employee satisfaction scores rose steadily. Innovation increased as people became more comfortable sharing ideas across traditional boundaries. The Japanese partnership flourished, with 2 more Asian investors approaching Pinnacle after hearing about their progressive approach from Mr. Tanaka. 4 months after the initial incident, Catherine invited Edith to join her for lunch in her office. The older woman arrived in her janitorial uniform, having just finished cleaning the east wing of the building. "I have something to share with you," Catherine said once they were settled. "The board has approved a new initiative based on our experiences these past few months." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a proposal for the Johnson Foundation, which would provide scholarships and internships for talented individuals from underrepresented backgrounds in business and technology. "You want to name it after me?" Edith asked, surprised. "Your story inspired it," Catherine explained. "I keep thinking about how many other brilliant people might be overlooked because of assumptions or lack of opportunities. The foundation will focus on recognizing potential in unexpected places, just as we failed to recognize yours for too long." Edith was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the foundation's proposed logo. "Robert would have loved this," she said finally, her voice soft with emotion. "He always said that talent is distributed equally throughout humanity, but opportunity is not. Will you help us launch it?" Catherine asked. "We'd like you to give the keynote address at the Foundation's inaugural event next month. The board feels, and I agree, that your story embodies the mission perfectly." Edith nodded slowly. "I'd be honored, though I'm not sure everyone wants to hear an old janitor speak at a fancy corporate event." Catherine smiled. "You're not just a janitor, Dr. Johnson. You never were. You're a professor, a linguist, a cultural expert, and now a symbol of how wrong our assumptions can be about the people around us." "We're all more than our job titles," Edith replied. "Every person you pass in the hallway has a story, has knowledge, has something valuable to contribute if given the chance." She paused, looking out the window at the busy city below. "My mother used to clean houses for wealthy white families in Alabama. She was brilliant with numbers, could calculate complex figures in her head faster than most people could with a pencil and paper. But no one ever saw that about her. They just saw someone who cleaned their floors." "Did she ever get the chance to use that ability?" Catherine asked, not professionally. "But she taught math to neighborhood children at our kitchen table every evening. Several went on to become engineers, teachers, accountants." Edith smiled at the memory. She used to say, "They might not see your light, but that doesn't mean you should stop shining." Catherine felt a lump in her throat. "That's beautiful, and very wise, and yes, she was a wise woman. I think she would appreciate what you're doing here," Edith said, gesturing to the foundation documents. "Seeing people's light, regardless of their position." As they continued discussing the foundation's details, Catherine reflected on how much had changed because of one impulsive moment, challenging an elderly janitor to translate a document. What had begun as an embarrassing mistake had transformed into a valuable lesson about assumptions and hidden potential, not just for her but for the entire company. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel sparkled with elegant decorations as guests mingled before the official launch of the Johnson Foundation. Business leaders, educators, community representatives, and Pinnacle employees from all levels filled the room. At the center of it all stood Edith Johnson, looking nothing like the janitor most had come to know. Dressed in a beautiful deep purple suit with a silk scarf, she greeted people with the confident ease of someone accustomed to academic gatherings. Catherine watched from nearby, still amazed by the transformation that had occurred over the past 6 months. What had begun as an awkward, impulsive challenge had blossomed into something neither woman could have predicted. The Japanese partnership had expanded into 3 additional Asian markets. Pinnacle's inclusive workplace practices had been featured in business magazines. Employee retention had improved dramatically, and now, this foundation would extend the lessons learned beyond the company's walls. "Quite a turnout," said Thomas, Catherine's assistant, scanning the crowd. "Dr. Johnson certainly draws an impressive audience. Did you see that the president of Howard University is here?" And 3 corporate CEOs who weren't even on our invitation list? Catherine nodded. Word spread quickly once people heard she was involved. Turns out Dr. Johnson's academic reputation is even more significant than we realized. The linguistics department chair from Tokyo University flew in specifically for this event. Amazing, Thomas replied. And to think 6 months ago she was never just anything. Catherine interrupted gently. That was our failure of perception, not her limitation. Thomas nodded, properly chastened. You're right. Sorry. At the far side of the room, Mr. Tanaka and his team were deep in conversation with Edith. The Japanese businessman had become one of Pinnacle's strongest partners and most vocal advocates in the Asian market. He bowed deeply to Edith, showing the profound respect he held for her. As the time approached for the formal program to begin, Catherine walked to the podium to welcome everyone. Looking out at the gathered crowd, she felt a sense of pride mixed with humility. Good evening, she began. Thank you all for joining us for the launch of the Johnson Foundation. 6 months ago, I made a mistake that turned out to be one of the most valuable learning experiences of my career. Catherine recounted the story of challenging Edith to translate the document, careful to frame it as her own failure rather than Edith's triumph. She spoke honestly about the assumptions she had made based solely on job title and appearance. The lesson I learned that day went far beyond discovering that our janitor was actually a renowned linguistics professor, Catherine explained. It was about recognizing how often we fail to see the complete humanity in each person we encounter, how easily we reduce people to their functions in our lives rather than acknowledging their full depth and potential. She introduced the mission of the Johnson Foundation: to identify and support talented individuals whose abilities might be overlooked due to bias, lack of opportunity, or unconventional career paths. The foundation would provide scholarships for education, fund internships at partner companies, and create mentorship networks. And now, Catherine said, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Edith Johnson, whose remarkable life inspired this foundation and whose wisdom continues to guide its development. Applause filled the room as Edith made her way to the podium. At 67, she moved with the careful dignity of someone who had experienced both the highest academic honors and the humility of physical labor. The room fell silent as she adjusted the microphone. Thank you, Catherine, Edith began, her voice clear and strong. And thank you all for being here tonight. She looked out at the audience for a moment before continuing. I'd like to begin by speaking to you in a few languages that have been important in my life, she said before delivering brief greetings in Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, French, and finally, in what she explained was the rural Alabama dialect of her childhood. Each language represents a different facet of who I am, she explained. The Japanese I learned as a scholar, the Korean through my research, Mandarin from colleagues, French from my husband who loved Paris, and that southern dialect, well, that's the language of my heart, of my beginnings. Edith spoke about growing up in segregated Alabama, the daughter of a house cleaner and a factory worker, both of whom valued education above all else. My parents could not change the world they lived in, she said, but they could make sure I was prepared for a different world they believed would eventually come. Every night after long days of physical labor, they studied with me at our kitchen table under a single light bulb. My father would say, education is the one thing they can never take away from you. She traced her journey through college on scholarships, her struggles and triumphs as one of few black female academics in her field during the 1970s and 80s, her marriage to fellow Professor Robert Johnson, and their shared commitment to opening doors for others. When Robert passed away 5 years ago, I found myself at a crossroads, Edith continued. The academic world that had been our home for decades suddenly felt empty without him. I needed something different, something that would give me space to grieve while still living purposefully. She explained her decision to take the janitorial position at Pinnacle, drawing surprised murmurs from those in the audience who hadn't heard the full story. Many have asked why someone with my background would choose to clean offices, Edith said with a small smile. The answer is simple: dignity exists in all work done with care and integrity. My parents taught me that. My father cleaned factory floors for 30 years and stood straighter and prouder than any executive I've ever known. She paused, looking around the room. But I also learned something important during my time as a janitor at Pinnacle. I learned how quickly we become invisible, when we're defined by certain roles, how completely our humanity can be diminished in others' eyes based solely on the work we do. And that lesson is perhaps more valuable than anything I learned in my academic career. Edith spoke about the Foundation's mission, emphasizing that it wasn't about discovering hidden geniuses, but rather about recognizing the inherent dignity, potential, and complexity in every person. The young woman who serves your coffee might be a brilliant artist. The man who drives your bus might be writing poetry between routes. The custodian mopping your floor might have a PhD, she said. But even if they don't, even if they are just doing the work you see them do, they deserve to be seen as complete human beings with dreams, talents, and value beyond their job descriptions. As she concluded her speech, Edith switched briefly into Japanese, then translated for the broader audience. There is an old Japanese concept called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the repair itself a beautiful part of the object's history, rather than something to hide. In many ways, this foundation represents our attempt at kintsugi for our society. We want to highlight the cracks in our systems where talent and potential are being lost, and fill those cracks with opportunity, turning points of weakness into lines of beautiful strength. The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Catherine watched as people wiped tears from their eyes, moved by Edith's words and the authenticity with which she delivered them. Later, as the formal program ended and guests mingled over dessert, Catherine found Edith in conversation with a group of young scholarship recipients, the Foundation's first cohort. "Your speech was incredible," Catherine said when there was a break in the conversation. "You moved everyone in that room," Edith smiled. "Words have power when they come from lived experience. These young people understand that better than most. Each of them has a remarkable story." Catherine looked at the diverse group of scholarship recipients: a former refugee now studying computer science, a single mother pursuing engineering while working full-time, a young man who had learned coding while incarcerated and now created programs to help others rebuild their lives. "Will you still continue your janitorial work?" one of them asked Edith curiously. 2 days a week," she confirmed. "I've grown quite fond of it, actually. There's a certain peace in creating order from chaos, in making spaces clean and welcoming for others, and it keeps me connected to different parts of the company that executives rarely see." Catherine shook her head in amazement. "You continue to teach me, Dr. Johnson. After all these months, I still catch myself making assumptions sometimes." "We all do," Edith said gently. "The important thing isn't achieving perfect perception, but remaining open to correction. The day we think we've figured everything out about the people around us is the day we stop growing." As the evening drew to a close, Catherine found herself standing with Edith near the large display that outlined the Foundation's mission. Photographs showed people of various ages, backgrounds, and occupations alongside quotes about their unexpected talents and dreams. "Did you ever imagine, 6 months ago when I so rudely challenged you to translate that document, that we'd end up here?" Catherine asked. Edith laughed softly. "Not specifically this, no. But I've lived long enough to know that meaningful connections can begin in unexpected ways. Sometimes a moment of tension or misunderstanding, if approached with openness, can lead to profound change." She looked around the ballroom, now emptying as guests departed. "The true test will be what happens next. Whether this foundation creates lasting opportunities or becomes just another corporate initiative that fades with time." "It won't fade," Catherine promised. "Not while either of us has anything to say about it." "Then we'll need to make sure others carry it forward eventually," Edith said practically. "I'm 67, and while you're young now, you won't always be running Pinnacle." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. This needs to become bigger than just us, embedded in the company's DNA and extended through partnerships." As they walked together toward the exit, Edith stopped suddenly, her expression serious. "You know, Catherine, there's something I've never told you about that first day when you challenged me." "What's that?" I almost didn't respond. I almost just nodded and kept cleaning, as I had done many times before when people made assumptions about me. "What made you decide to answer?" Catherine asked. Edith considered the question for a moment. "I saw something in your face. Frustration, yes, but also a genuine passion for your company's success. And I thought perhaps we might help each other. Though I had no idea it would lead to all of this." She gestured around them at the remnants of the evening's celebration. "I'm glad you decided to speak up," Catherine said softly. "It changed everything, for me, for Pinnacle, and now, hopefully, for all the people this foundation will support." "Small moments often contain the seeds of great change," Edith replied, her voice warm with wisdom accumulated over decades. "The challenge is recognizing which ones to nurture." Together they walked out into the cool evening air. An unlikely friendship formed across differences of age, race, and position, a living example of the very principle the Johnson Foundation sought to promote. That human potential appears in unexpected places, waiting only for someone to look past the surface and truly see.